Hi, Ty from Groovy Entertainment. Today we got another book on tape to play for you. Today's book is Count of Monte Cristo for 1979. So let's get started.
Imprisoned by his enemies, our hero spent long years dreaming of vengeance in his cell amidst the rage and tears. Escaped the fortress, nearly drowned, he found the fortune vast and set about to right the wrong. Revenge was his at last. This is your Kid Stuff read-along book. Every time you hear this chime, it means that you are to turn the page in your storybook. Now we are ready to begin our adventure. Open your book, and we will start the story of The Count of Monte Cristo. Remember, when you hear the chime, turn the page.
It all began in the year 1815. The great ship, Pharaoh, was making its way into the harbor of Marseille, France. Word spread throughout the city that the ship had returned from its long voyage. Many people were interested in this ship. First of all, there was the girl, Mercedes, who was in love with a young officer on the ship. Then there were the merchants who waited to see their goods that the ship had brought back to France. As soon as the ship dropped anchor, the merchants began to board her, but the captain, who had begun the voyage, was nowhere in sight. In his place stood a young man named Edmond Dantes. One of the ship's owners boarded the vessel and called to Edmond.
"Where is the captain?"
Edmond walked over to the man and told him that the captain had fallen with brain fever and was dead. Edmond said,
"So I have brought the cargo safely back to France."
The man who owned the ship was very proud of Edmond and told him that the ship would be his, for he would be the captain from this time on. Edmond was so pleased with the news that he did not recognize the voice of the girl who loved him. Mercedes called to him, "Edmond, you're back!" He turned, and there was the beautiful Mercedes. He ran to her and told her how much he had missed her, and now that he was captain of the ship, they could be married. All this time, the ship's bookkeeper watched them, his face filled with rage and jealousy, for he felt that the ship should be his, and that he should be the new captain. He watched as Edmond and the ship's owner left the harbor. As their carriage drove out of sight, the bookkeeper planned his revenge. That night, he called his friend Fernand to his office. Fernand could not believe his ears. The bookkeeper stood up and said,
"I know, Fernand, that you love Mercedes, but she is planning to marry that young fool, Dantes."
Fernand was furious and said,
I will have my revenge.
They thought and thought.
There must be a way to destroy Edmond Dantes.
Said Fernand. After a few moments, the bookkeeper, named Danglars, who wanted the ship for himself, looked over at his friend and smiled.
"I shall destroy Dantes. He has letters that the old captain was carrying. They are to be delivered by Dantes to friends of Napoleon here in France. If he is caught with them, they will say that Edmond is a traitor. He will be arrested and tried for treason and imprisoned. His fate is sealed."
Fernand raised a glass of champagne and said,
A toast to the destruction of the man called Edmond Dantes.
The day that Edmond and Mercedes' wedding was to take place arrived. Just before the ceremony was to start, a cart filled with police drove up to Edmond's house, and they placed him under arrest. Edmond tried to tell the police that he was innocent of any wrongdoing, but they laughed at him as they drove him from the house. The bookkeeper and his friend, Fernand, had made sure that the judge found Edmund guilty of a crime against the state. When Edmund heard the charges against him, he tried to speak out in his defense, but the guards would not let him speak. He could not believe it when he heard the judgment against him.
You are to be taken to the Chateau d'If, where you will remain for the rest of your life.
The Chateau d'If was a monstrous fortress in the harbor of Marseille. Once you entered there, you would never leave alive. Edmund tried to break free, but his bonds were tight. Soon he was on board a ship, and as he looked out a porthole, the prison grew larger and larger as the ship sailed closer to it. All that happened next was a blur to him. Several years passed, but no one came to right the wrong that had been done to him. Edmund remembered being thrown into a small cell with a tiny barred window, where a little moonlight would stream into his cell. One day, he heard a scratching sound coming from the cell next to his. He started to dig around the stones that made up the wall of his prison. Many months went by before he was able to break through the cell wall. On the other side, he met a very old and weak man who told Edmund that his name was the Abbé Faria. They became friends. The old man told Edmund one day of a treasure that was hidden away in a cave.
It will be yours if you ever get out of here,
The old man said.
I found this parchment hidden in the hollow of my bedstead.
The cave was located at the mouth of the Monte Cristo inlet, and it had been there since 1498, or so the letter said. A few years later, the old man died, and it was at this time that Edmund planned for his escape. He sewed himself into the sack in which the body of Abbé Faria was to be tossed into the bay. For at Chateau d'If, they buried the dead at sea. Edmund was able to escape from the sack and swam to shore. As soon as he could, he went in search of the treasure. He remembered where the letter said it would be, and when he got there, he discovered that the letter was true. The treasure was there. Never had Edmund seen such gold and silver and so many diamonds. At last, Edmund could have his revenge on the men who placed him in that prison. First, he disguised himself and gave himself a new name. He called himself the Count of Monte Cristo. He was thus able to return to Marseille, where one by one, the men who had tried to destroy him were themselves destroyed. Some were ruined and lost all their money or were killed in a duel. Edmund could not believe that the girl that he had loved so many years before had married Fernand, and that they had a child. Edmund went to her and said,
Mercedes, do you know me?
I think I know you from so long ago. As she looked into the Count's eyes, she suddenly called to him, Edmund, I thought you were dead. Edmund then told her all that had happened. His 14 years in Chateau d'If, his finding out that Fernand had had a part in seeing him wrongly accused, the death of his father from starvation because he was unable to help him.
And now you want me to turn away from my revenge?
But it was not for Fernand that she asked Edmund to forget his revenge. It seemed that her son was seeking out the Count to help save the life of his father. Her son wanted to fight a duel with him. The next night, just as Mercedes said, there came a knock at the door, and her son proposed that he and the Count have a duel. The next morning, Edmund fired his gun so that it would only graze the boy. He had no quarrel with Mercedes' son. When it was over, he knew that he would leave Marseille forever. All the men who had harmed him had been destroyed, so Edmund left and never returned. But he never forgot Mercedes or what had happened to him.
So that was the Count of Monte Cristo for 1979. So if you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Have a groovy day with another video coming out real soon. And our next book will be this.